Hey Hylians! So, The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword is finally getting a HD remaster, and I am so excited to play this game again. It's been such a long time. Fun fact, Skyward Sword was the first Zelda game I followed the development of. I remember watching E3, waiting for updates, watching all of the trailers. And of course, I remember that bit of official artwork depicting Link and Fi before we even knew who Fi was and everyone thought she was the fairy queen from Wind Waker. 2021 marks this game's 10th anniversary, so I really don't see a more perfect time to bring it back. This game is definitely the most story heavy in the series so far, so I'm looking forward to see all the new Zelda fans who got into the series with Breath of the Wild try this out for the first time. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about all of that today. Today I want to talk about some little changes and additions to this game that we could possibly see. Now, this is more of a remaster and less of a remake, but even with that, it doesn't mean that we won't get some small changes and new content in this game. For example, if we look at all of the 3D Zelda games already remade, that's Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, each of them has gotten a couple small changes and new additions added to them. And with Skyward Sword, we've already seen that there's amiibo support, so that could mean that there is a couple of new additions coming to the game. But before we get onto any brand new additions, I want to focus on the smaller changes that we could see for this game, as these are the things I feel we are much more likely to see happen. So let's start with something that was mentioned in the Direct, the stamina gauge. When talking about this in the Direct, it was less about how it was changing, but more about how aspects from Skyward Sword were used and adapted for Breath of the Wild. The main ones being the stamina gauge and the sailcloth, which ended up becoming the paraglider. You can actually see this in some early footage shown at the Game Awards, as in that you can see Link using the exact same sailcloth from Skyward Sword, and not the paraglider found in the final release of Breath of the Wild. As they mentioned this, that things from Skyward Sword influenced Breath of the Wild, maybe it could work the other way with this remaster. The stamina gauge in Skyward Sword is something I really liked, though it does have problems. It never seemed to last all that long, and you really had to rely on stamina fruit to be able to run for a long amount of time. You did have slight upgrades tied to potions, but they would run out after a while and you would be back to your normal stamina gauge. A simple change would be lengthening the amount of time that you can use stamina for, and making it so it doesn't run out as fast. This doesn't have to be a crazy amount of extra time, just enough to make it feel more worthwhile running around. There's also the idea of possible upgrades to stamina, like in Breath of the Wild. Permanent upgrades possibly tied to side quests, like the gratitude crystals, or perhaps all new ones. Maybe even keeping with the Breath of the Wild theme and having the upgrades connected somehow to the goddess statue in Skyloft. This though is a little less likely in my eyes, due to there being a handful of puzzles in the game where you really need to manage your stamina. Allowing the player to upgrade to 2 or even 3 stamina gauges could break those puzzles, but it's not entirely something I couldn't see Nintendo doing. One of the big things I feel people have a problem with in this game is how in later parts there seems to be a handful of required events that can feel a little tedious. The main one for a lot of people seems to be the tad tones. And so I'm going to use that as the main example for this new change that we could see, shortening down key events. At first, this might sound a little weird. Why would Nintendo want to take stuff away from the game? Well, I'm not saying for them to outright remove these aspects of the game, but more to shorten them. In the HD remake of Wind Waker, Nintendo did a big thing that I feel was greatly needed and made the game flow so much better in the later half. They changed the Triforce Charts quest. In this part of the game, originally, you would need to get the chart, get Tingle to decipher the chart, and then find the Triforce piece. In the HD remake, while some of the charts are still there and you do need to go see Tingle still, a number of them were simply replaced with the Triforce piece itself. pretty much removing the middleman from many of these pieces. And I think this was a great thing to change, as in the original release of Wind Waker, the Triforce Charts quest is one of the lower points of the game for many people. This is exactly what they could do with some of the later parts of Skyward Sword. The tad tones would work really well with this, as you can't remove some of them, as then the song at the end would most likely look different. But to somewhat shorten it, they could move the tad tones closer together and make them slightly easier to see. The tad tones are quite small, and I've definitely had trouble finding them sometimes. This idea of shortening down some of these moments would also work in other areas of the game, like the Elden Volcano stealth area and of course the Silent Realms. I don't want these moments removed, as I do really enjoy them even if they can be a little tedious, so simply shortening them down slightly and making them flow a little better I think would work really well. And now, I think you all know what time it is. It is time to finally talk about the big one. Let's talk about Fi. Or Fi. If there is one thing about Skyward Sword that even people who haven't played this game know about, it's her. And before we go too far into this, I just want to say, I actually really like Fi as a character. The way she's used in the story and continues to be used in the series from what we saw in Breath of the Wild is something I really enjoy. She is the Master Sword. She's been with us throughout the series even before we even knew about her. And that in my eyes makes her really special, and it's why I've really loved her as a character. She's a companion even after the main game that she's in. But what I don't like so much about her is the way she's used and implemented in the gameplay of Skyward Sword. Fi is a helper character, in the same vein as Navi and Midna. She's created to help the player as they make their way throughout the game, giving hints, reminding them on where to go, the standard stuff of a helper character. And that itself isn't a bad thing. Helper characters are not a bad idea. They are designed to help the players. But with Fi, it does go a little bit too far at times. The best example I can give is when you've talked to a character and as soon as you finish talking to them, Fi pops up and repeats the exact same thing that person just said, only now worded slightly differently to fit her more robotic style. And this doesn't happen just a couple of times. This happens a lot. A stupid amount, honestly. Many times in this game, you'll already have an idea what you need to be doing next, and sometimes you'll talk to a character who will remind you of that. Cool, that's fine, they're just making sure I know what I'm doing. But then Fi pops up and will say the exact same thing again. It really does feel at times that this game doesn't trust us to figure things out ourselves, and that's not fun. There is a very easy and very simple fix for this. Simply remove all or most of these unneeded little pop-ups from Fi. She doesn't need to turn up every 5 minutes to tell me that I need to find pumpkin soup or remind me how to use dowsing. For the 12th time. If Nintendo are that worried that some people might not be able to play this game without all of this, then maybe they could add an option for tips. If you want to use the tips, Fi will show up more often to help you, and if you don't, she'll only appear at key moments where she's needed to inform you on new information. In the Wii versions of the game, you could press a button to call Fi if needed, but honestly this was mainly used so she could tell you, "Master, the batteries in your Wii remote are nearly depleted." In the Switch version, this button could be what's used to give you hints if you need them. If you forget what to do, you can ask her. If you need a reminder on what's happening in the story, you can ask her. And if you need to know about dowsing again, you can ask her. You choose when you get the help, not the game. I really do feel that cutting down on the amount of times that Fi pops up for no reason is something we will see. And doing this, I think, will help her as a character. Because again, I really enjoy her. A lot of people enjoy her. but there are also so many people who simply can't get over the annoyance she can be in gameplay, and that's understandable. So we've talked about changes that we could see. Now what about new content? With these remakes and remasters of past Zelda games, we've always seemed to get at least a little something added to them. In Ocarina of Time 3D we had the Master Quest and Boss Rush. In Majora's Mask 3D we had the newly added fishing holes. In Wind Waker HD we had the Tingle Bottles and Swift Sail. In Link's Awakening we had the Dungeon Maker minigame. And in Twilight Princess we had the all-new dungeon, the Cave of Shadows. A multi-floor dungeon like the Cave of Ordeals, except this time you could only play it as Wolf Link. So from this track record of them adding new stuff to the remakes and remasters, it does seem like we could get more stuff added to Skyward Sword HD. And with this game being said to have amiibo support already, that just kind of adds to the idea more. Though, can we not lock the new content behind the amiibo this time, Nintendo? We don't want to repeat the Cave of Shadows again, please. There's also other games that have been brought over from the Wii U to the Switch, like 3D World, which has gotten the all-new Bowser's Fury mode. So new content is being added to these older games even outside of the Zelda series. I have 4 little ideas of possible modes and new additions we could see added to this game, though please keep in mind that these are just ideas and still might be a little bit much for a simple HD remaster. They are things that I would like to see though, and I think they would be quite fun to see added. First off is an all-new minigame centered around bomb bowling. I think most people who played Skyward Sword remember bomb bowling, that or you just remember it from the meme that it's become over the recent years. But with how interesting, fun, and kind of silly it is, I'm surprised we didn't get a minigame centered around it. The very easy idea is to literally have a game of bowling but with using bombs. Maybe rolling the bombs towards a group of approaching bokoblins or moblins and getting points for hitting them. And sticking with the theme of bombs, what about a minigame with the Grusinator? I don't remember there being one in the original release, and I feel again it's a missed opportunity. Maybe a minigame where you need to hit targets or launch Link onto different platforms. Or even have a completely non-canon minigame where you just have to play a game of basketball. The ball being a giant bomb, and the basket being the imprisoned's mouth. Now onto the bigger ideas, things away from simple minigames. And that is new side modes playing as different characters. Again, please keep in mind that these are just ideas and I would be really surprised if they happened, but they are something I would really like to see. The first one is a small mode where we get to play as the best boy in Skyward Sword, Groose. And this side mode would be called The Legend of Grooseland. In all honesty, I have no idea what this mode would include. I just imagine us to be playing as Groose in his own little fantasy world where he is the hero, and it would include a lot of bombs. Which also seems to be a theme on this list. Obviously, this is inspired by some of the things that Groose says throughout the game, and I've always wanted to have a small side mode or side game where we finally get to experience Groose's legend. But as much as I'd like a mode playing as Groose, there is one mode that I have wanted ever since I first played this game, and that is a new story mode playing out the events, or at least some of them, that Zelda went through when she first dropped down to the surface. With Zelda being on her own adventure in Skyward Sword that we don't really get to see all the little details of, I've always wanted to see what she had to do and how she got to some of the springs. As we all know, Zelda's starting goal was to get to each of the springs at each of the temples, to pray to the goddesses. But I've always been really interested in seeing how she exactly got to them, especially as she wasn't always with Impa. It hurts even more not getting something like this, as in the end credits of Skyward Sword we do get to see small clips of Zelda's adventure. Not that Zelda's adventure. Earlier when talking about things that could change, I mentioned that Nintendo used Skyward Sword as inspiration for the stamina gauge and paraglider in Breath of the Wild, and that they could use what they did in reverse, bringing the updated stamina gauge back to Skyward Sword. It seems that Nintendo are not only bringing this game out because it's the last 3D Zelda to be remastered, but also because it does seem to have small connections to Breath of the Wild, and perhaps they're hoping that people who got into the series with Breath of the Wild will play and enjoy Skyward Sword. One of the things that people have been wanting and talking about in regards to Breath of the Wild sequel is the possibility of Zelda being playable, and I think using Skyward Sword as a way to test that idea out would be really good. We already know that Zelda in Skyward Sword has her own little adventure, so it makes sense to have her be the Zelda to test this out on. See how people would really react to a playable Zelda in a mainline game. Especially if Zelda will be playable in Breath of the Wild sequel, it'd be a nice little way to get fans ready for that, but again, that's all just an idea. So I've got to ask, what do you think will be added and changed in Skyward Sword HD? And what do you think of my ideas, even the slightly less likely ones? I am super excited to play Skyward Sword again, that even without any changes or new additions, it will be a joy. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe for even more Zelda content. And also don't forget to hit the notification bell to never miss an upload from me. Thank you all for watching all the way to the end of today's video. I hope you've all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye!